So design and measurement unit 4, page 3. This last one here, if it's perimeter, which means the distance around something, if this shape is partly a rectangle and partly a circle, right? If this is 240 there, what's here? Yeah, it's 240 as well, right? So might as well write that in. Now this shape here is basically half of a circle, right? Now if I was to do the perimeter of a circle, there was a formula for that. Circumference equals pi times diameter, which we got from the last page here over here.
So it was
No, that's for area. We're just doing the length around it, so which is called the circumference. Pi is just a number in your calculator, a special number, okay? 3.141592654, etc., etc. So pi multiplied. Now, what is the diameter of this circle? Like, imagine this is a circle. Okay, what's the diameter? It's distance across. Can we figure it out? It doesn't. It's not labeled. Where can I get the diameter from?
in the middle.
Yeah, it's the 120. It's right here. From here to here, that is also the diameter. So it's 120 from here to there. That's all I needed. So pi times 120 would be pi times 120 be 376.99 centimeters. But I don't want the whole circle. I only want half of that. So half of 376.99 is approximately, if I take that number and divide by 2, 188 point, let's say 5. So that's what's going to go on here. 188.5 centimeters from there to there. So that's where all the work was, figuring out that curve.
Oh, so that's what I did.
Now I can just add them all up. So the perimeter, the total perimeter, is going to be the 120 over here, plus the 240 on top, plus the 240 on the bottom, plus the calculated amount of the curve, which is 188.5. So I'm going to punch all that in. I got around 788.5 centimeters. And I would say that's my final answer.
Is that
That's what I got.
5 times what and half?
Here?
Yeah.
So half of this, yeah. Just that's nothing. Half of that will give you the curve. So it's kind of like a puzzle that you need to solve to find those, get all the parts together and add them all together. Okay? So this one was meant to be a bit of a challenge. And that's kind of where the challenge in this unit will come from, when you're missing parts and you have to calculate them before you solve the question. Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to area. Good morning. Yep, you want it?
Yes, please.
So area is basically space, right? This whole sheet here, if I talked about the area of this sheet, that means the amount of space in it, okay? Two-dimensional space. Think of it as space on top, okay? So, like our skin covers our body's surface area, It sits on the surface of our bodies. Okay? But that's generally what area is. Just if I wanted to know the area of this room, I would just, there's a couple ways I could do it. Each one of these little tiles here is 1 foot by 1 foot. So each one of these tiles is 1 square foot. Okay, that's what these tiles are called, 1 square foot. So if I counted up all the tiles in this room, I could find out how many square feet this room is, and that would be the area of the room. That would be very tedious, right? If I had to go and count each tile. In general, a quick way to find area is just to multiply 2 dimensions together. If I do that, I'll get the shaded space. So really, area, I'm going to add this note here. We get area by multiplying 2 dimensions. For some kinds of areas there's extra work, but in general it's 2 dimensions. So the simplest kind of shape to find the area of would be a rectangle. And to find the area of a rectangle, all you would do is take the length and multiply by the width. Or whatever you want to call them. You could call this width, you could call that height. Doesn't matter what you call them. If you take 2 dimensions, multiply them together, it gives you an area. So like the area of this would just be 15 feet times 8 feet. $120, and when you multiply like feet by feet, you get feet squared. Or the more common way of saying that is 120 square feet. And if you look at one of these tiles, that's what a square foot looks like. Okay. So square feet. It's very, it's conventional for like any type of a room to be reported in square feet. If you look at houses, like if you looked at like buying a house or something, they'll always list this, what's called the square footage, which tells you how much space you have to walk around in. Okay. I think real estate rules in Winnipeg or Manitoba, they always list square footage, and that includes any space that's above ground level. It doesn't include your basement. Because basements, you may or may not live in them, but it certainly includes each floor above ground. Okay, and that's your square footage. Now, anybody know like what like a bedroom? Roughly how many square feet a bedroom is usually?
Depends on where you live.
Yeah, for like a normal sized bedroom, not a super sized bedroom. Roughly how many feet do you think it is from one wall to the next wall? 20 feet?
Too far.
If you got 20 feet, you got a huge room, right? That is a massive, massive room. Okay, let's think about it. Just to visualize this. A bed, how long is a bed?
Oh.
Yeah.
72 centimeters, king bed.
Inches maybe, yeah.
Inches.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Usually, like I'm about 6 feet tall, and in an average bed, I can lie down and I fit. Right. My legs aren't hanging off. It fits. So usually a bed is around 6 feet, maybe a little longer. Okay. Then usually, if a bed is in a room, how many more feet till you get to the wall? If the bed's around 6 feet, how many more feet to get to the wall? Lengthwise? So that'd be a pretty long room. If you can fit 2 beds, length end to end, That's pretty long. But I think most rooms you can't, right?
Yeah.
Maybe like you could fit another half a bed or something. So roughly around 10 feet.
Yeah.
Like a child's bedroom is usually a bit smaller because child's beds are also smaller. But yeah, 10 feet is a pretty normal size for a room. It's actually considered a little bit large. I think a standard bedroom is usually considered like 8 to 10 feet.
In my bedroom, I can fit my bed, my TV, my book stand, with DVDs,
Yeah,
and my computer and my chair.
yeah.
Well, so
So that's pretty good.
yeah.
It also depends on the shape. So what happens is sometimes a bedroom will be shaped kind of like this, where if you put the bed on the end, it would kind of go wall to wall, and then you have a bunch of space. Or if you put the bed this way, there wouldn't be as much space. So this is a very rectangular shape.
So that's my room.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in a room like this, usually what will happen is like the short side will usually be like maybe 8 feet, 7 or 8 feet. Or it could even be as low as 6. But then you usually have longer, like 12 feet or something like that. If the room is perfectly square, then you might expect it to be maybe like 9 by 9 or something like that. But usually a standard bedroom is like no more than 100 square feet. Like a 10 by 10 bedroom is pretty big. That's considered pretty big. But some rooms can be like quite a bit smaller. Now, if you become an architect and you design spaces, you spend a lot of time making blueprints which show areas, and they're all listed, right? You got your dimensions and the areas. And there are kind of like design guidelines, but also building codes that say you can't have a room smaller than this amount. There's no limit for how large you can make something.
Wait, then
but
how
usually.
does New York get away with small spaces?
Yeah, so what will happen in a really condensed city, like where there's a lot, like really high population density, think New York, or extreme cases like Hong Kong, where you got like millions of people occupying very small land area, especially like high-rise apartments everywhere, then the codes might be different and they might allow for the rooms to be very, very small. And it's quite interesting to look at. So if I was to actually try to learn about that a little bit more, let's just see if I can. So standard room sizes, and it depends on where you are. So if I just put in general in a house,
Oh, there's a stats right there.
so they're saying a small room is considered 6 by 6, which means you could fit like just a bed in there and it's really small. A medium room, which is a common bedroom, would be 8 by 10. A large room is 8 by 15, and that's kind of normal.
Right there.
These are like house plans. So if you look at a basic house plan, this is the design of a house with a porch on it. That's a pretty big bedroom there. Look at that, almost 13 feet.
Well, they said my bedroom is the master.
A master bedroom is usually the biggest.
Yeah, that's where I sleep.
Because they're usually expecting with a master bedroom that, you know, that's where adults are staying, right? Dining room, kitchen. Do you recognize these symbols? We talked about that. See how it says 12 and it's got 1 tick? That means feet. And then it's got 7 and 2 ticks. What are the 2 ticks?
We talked about this?
Yeah, very briefly I showed you what the ticks were. So here, I'm just going to go back to this. Okay. I think I showed you back here. Yeah, right on the first page there. These little ticks,
Oh,
that means feet. If you see the little 1 tick. But if it's got 2 ticks, it means inches. So what happens when you're talking about room sizes or people's height even, the first number will have 1 tick to tell you how many feet and then how many inches. And then once you get enough inches, you make another foot. How many inches in a foot? Does anybody know? How many inches in a foot? 12. That's right. That's why you'll never see a dimension that says like 10 tick 12 2 inches. Once you get to 12, that's another foot. So you could see 10 feet, like 10, I'll show you what it looks like here. You could see something like, you could see 10 feet and 11 inches, but you won't see it say 10 feet 12 inches. Because once you do that, you've got 11 feet then, right? So usually the number you'll see with the two ticks after it is somewhere between 0 and 12, but not up to 12. It could even be like a decimal thing. It could even be like 11.9 or something like that. Okay. People's heights are normally are quite often, if you go to a doctor, it's listed in centimeters, but people more commonly can visually see feet and inches better. It's the imperial system, you know. I think I'm just under 6 feet. Last time I checked, I was like 5 foot 11 and a half inches or something. I didn't quite make it. That kind of thing. Your driver's license, I think they list in feet and inches, so it'll have your height, whatever they measure. Right. Most people are like between 5 and 6 feet tall. But then on the other extremes, there are some people who are way over 6 feet and some people who are way under 5 feet. But I think, you know, average heights are, what do you think? What's an average height, do you think? Yeah, I think male heights are the average is a little higher. But yeah, probably 5'8", 5'7", that kind of thing. Yeah. It depends on where you live too, right? It changes. Right? So in some areas, not even within countries, there may be some areas where everybody's tall, and then some areas where everybody's short, right?
Do you know Amazon?
Yeah. And so I see players that go to the NBA that come from like African players. Usually they come from certain parts of Africa where those people all happen to be really tall, right? Okay. But feet and inches, you should be familiar with those. And it's good for us to visually sort of be able to estimate area. So that's for bedrooms anyway. And just because I was interested, and it is interesting to think about, what's considered a small size, room size here, 6 by 6, may be different in other countries. So if I choose,
has a porch.
it's got a nice big porch, yeah. If I choose a densely populated country or city, let's try Hong Kong. Hong Kong standard room size.
Google image it. Oh, there it is.
What's that?
Room size on the
Down here?
13 and 2. Last link.
It's 322 square feet.
One queen size.
That's at a hotel, though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a whole thing about mattress sizes, how the rules are different in Hong Kong than they are. Maybe I should have said like bedroom size. I'd have to do a lot of reading there to find what I'm looking for.
House sizes.
There's something weird here about rules about sizes. A helper room size in Hong Kong. So there's a room in here. Someone's writing about, I don't feel comfortable with someone living in such a small room. This room is 2 meters by 1.2 meters. So 78 inches by 47 inches. So that is
A broom closet?
6.5 feet by 4 feet. That is really, really small for someone to live in.
Is that like a storage room size?
So let's just walk it out here. So 6 feet. So 6 feet would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So from there to there, that's the long dimension of the room, from the bookcase to the end of me. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, and this would be the other wall here.
That is a broom closet.
So that would be a closet by Canadian standards, but apparently that's a helper room size, and it's an acceptable legal like helper room size in Hong Kong. And again, why is that? Because they've got so many people in such a small space.
How do you sleep though?
Yeah. There's also different things, like you see places like Japan, here we call them Japanese doors. Here we have doors that open, right? Now the problem with doors that open is they take up space. So if you have a door that opens, you can't have a bed right there or you'll hit it, right? So our doors, like a standard door is like 30 inches, like 2.5 feet, which means you need an extra 2.5 feet just for a door to be able to swing open, right?
Oh, and so why there is slides?
That's why they have sliding
Sliding
doors. Well, now all of a sudden you don't need that 2.5 feet anymore. So those sliding doors, we call them typically we'll call them Japanese doors. There they just call them doors. That's it allows you to have smaller spaces because you don't have to have that
Why are
doors.
some of them so paper thin?
Yeah, I know they're almost like dividers. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's interesting. So those kind of like, if you become an architect and you design things, it depends on where you're designing for. So design rules for different countries, also design rules in cities versus country are very different. Here, Canada has a lot of space, so we tend to waste a lot of space, right? Like there are some housing designs here where you walk in and there's like a huge space, we just call it a foyer, which means there's actually no purpose for it other than to have somewhere when you walk in. And it's just dead space, it has no purpose. It's great if you have a party and you want to have 50 people stand at the front door, but otherwise it's just empty space, right? But you won't see that very commonly in densely populated countries. All right. Where's my... There it is. Okay. So back to the math. It is valuable to try to visualize area and space. Square feet, like square footage is something that is commonly used here, so it is useful to try to visually imagine what that amount of space looks like, what 100 square feet looks like. You should kind of have an idea how much it is. Now, having done this, how big do you think this room is? Who wants to guess? How many square feet do you think this room is?
20
20 square feet?
from this side.
So you're saying 20 is one dimension?
Yeah.
Okay, and then how far? So how far do you think the long dimension is here? Take a guess.
About
85? 40 or 45? Okay. You said 20. Anybody want to go higher than 45? 45 going once, 45,
I'll go
40, 50, okay. So those are close. Okay, so that's the long dimension. How deep do you think the room is?
15.
Half that? Like 25, 20,
27.
15? All right. We can figure it out because we actually have tiles to count, okay? So not including the cabinetry, if I started over there, I could just count these tiles. If I had a measuring tape, I could just pull it, right? but I don't have one. So each of these is a foot. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. That's 20. 27. So if you said 25, that's pretty close. 27 that way. So we know it's going to be more than 27 this way, right?
Yep.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this room is, it's a big room, right?
Yeah.
So what did I say, 27?
27 there and 30.
By
there,
38?
38.
Okay, so 27 by 38. So this room, if I was doing a sketch of it, I would say 38 feet that way and 27 feet that way. Okay, calculate the area of this room.
So it's multiply, right?
Okay, let's
950.
38 times. So if I multiply them together, 38 times 27 is 1,026. So
Okay. Got
it's hard to put the tick squared, so we usually just put like square feet. We just say it, square feet. So that's quite a bit. So this room is actually,
a decent size room.
it's actually a normal size for a house, a bungalow. So for a house in Winnipeg that's on one floor, we call it a bungalow. This is a normal size for the whole house. It's hard to think of it that way because it's not set up that way. It's a bunch of tables, it's a classroom. But in this amount of space, you can, remember we said a standard bedroom size is around 8 by 10? 8 by 10? So you could fit.
You could live in here because of the size.
Yeah, you could turn this into a living space with really high ceilings. It's hard to visualize, but if this is 27 feet this way, I could fit like for example, if I took this space, and if I were an architect, which clearly I'm not, I can't even draw straight lines. It was 38 this way. I could like say that that's 10 feet, and I could fit like 3 bedrooms here, right? So right here, I could have 3 normal size bedrooms.
But that could be your kitchen.
Sure. You don't usually see like houses where they have 3 rooms adjacent to each other, but if I'm just chopping the space up, I could do it. Imagine we could chop it up and then move it around. Okay. So I could easily just have like a third of this space would be like 3 bedrooms. And then what are the other big rooms in a house?
Living room.
A living room?
Yeah.
And a living room is usually maybe a little bit bigger than a bedroom. And usually it's a bit more open, like there's window, and usually it's like it doesn't have a closed door to it and stuff like that. So they seem bigger than they are. So you have your living room, and then you have your kitchen.
Table. Like reading table.
Sure. So if it was a more modern house, they tend to be open. So you have your kitchen, and maybe you have like an island or something like that, right? And then you might have your like living room here, right? Living space. This is the kitchen. And you could easily do that with this space in here, right? If this was, you could have like 18 feet this way, which is tons, and 27 feet that way. So have a huge kitchen. Imagine that. Imagine I got cupboards here, and this is my island, right? And then there's like a living space there with a huge TV, okay? That's a big space. And I would still have, so knocking out this part here, for rooms, 3 bedrooms, knocking out this part here for a huge kitchen, living room, I would still have all this space
So
here.
that's it. What about that space?
Yeah, so what am I missing?
Washroom.
Yeah, bathrooms for sure. Usually you try to have a bathroom over by the bedroom somewhere, right?
There's some in the kitchen sometimes.
You can have a bathroom attached to the bedrooms attached inside.
Yeah, quite often there's something attached to the bedroom somewhere. If there's a master bedroom that's bigger, sometimes they'll have what's called an ensuite, which is a bathroom off the master bedroom. Pretty much new houses all have that because people aren't going to pay over $500,000 for something unless there is like that special bathroom, right? People like bathrooms. Okay, so on this whole section here, because I didn't put one, you'd have to have some kind of formal bathroom. Probably a full bathroom would be one. There's actual guidelines in Canada for sizes. A full bathroom has to be over a certain number of square feet. It has to be able to fit a full-size bathtub. Then there's things called 3/4 baths, which is when you have just a shower, no bathtub, just a shower. And then you have half bathrooms. Half bathrooms are usually the ones that you see in your bedrooms, where it's literally a sink and a toilet. And in old houses, actually it's pretty cool. In really old houses, sometimes they put them in under the stairwells. They just hide them everywhere in the old bathroom. But yeah, there'd be lots of room for. I have a formal dining area as well as a living room. If I only had 3 bedrooms, I could have a huge bathroom, and then I could have some other room for something, an extra bedroom, or I don't know.
Man cave.
Yeah. So it's interesting. But we tend to waste a lot of space, right? In Canada, because we have it, we waste it.
Not my mom.
Have you ever been to IKEA?
Nope.
Yeah? Do you see IKEA house?
Yeah.
Right? And they're trying to show you that this is sort of a small amount of space that a whole family could live in. And how big is that thing? Do you remember? The IKEA house?
It's probably.
It's not this big, right? I think it's under 500 square feet, like maybe 400 square feet or something.
What about those tiny little houses that they're
Yeah.
into now?
Yeah,
Is this standard
it's
size?
kind of neat. Yeah, there's television shows about it. They're
Yeah.
called tiny houses, and people have like 200 square foot houses and stuff like that. The thing is, you're not allowed to build them.
What?
You're not allowed to build them. Winnipeg city building codes have minimum sizes, and you're not allowed. Even if you wanted to build a tiny house, the city wouldn't let you.
So you can't buy the kid?
So usually when you see those shows about people having tiny houses, the houses are always in the country somewhere because their building codes are much looser. If you went outside of Winnipeg and just got some land, you could probably get a tiny house, be easier to do it. But in the city, they regulate everything. So now it's actually considered one of the problems in Canada, especially for young people who want to buy a house someday, is they can't buy small houses, right? Like the average new house costs several $100,000 because you can't buy small, right? You have to buy, I don't even know if you can buy a house with less than 3 bedrooms now.
Nowadays, like you said, they look like mansions, but they're not mansions.
Yeah, they're like everything's supersized, right? It's like going to McDonald's and saying I want a small burger, a small and small fries, and McDonald's saying to you, no, we only have supersize. And that's kind of the housing market in Canada right now, which is frustrating. I think it's going to change. I think it's going to change, and they're going to allow people to start having smaller places. So people that want smaller are kind of forced to go to condos. Condos are basically apartments that you own, right? It's a shared space. And you're going to start seeing more of those. Row houses were really popular in England. You don't see them here as much. Here, sometimes we call them townhouses. And that's when you have maybe like 4 or 5. I lived in a townhouse when I was a kid, and there was about 5. And they're all attached. So you start to see some more of those. That's one way you can get a smaller, more affordable space. But detached houses, they're all really, really expensive, which is too bad, right? But I think that'll change. I think it'll change. Once people stop buying them, right? Yeah. They're very expensive, and the reason they build them to that size is that the developers make a lot of money on them. There's more money in selling a bigger house than in a smaller house, right? Because if you think about it, this is a business idea, so this is an economics thing. If you're building a house, does it take that much more time? Like, your biggest cost when you do anything is labor, not the materials, it's labor, right? You'll pay way more for people's wages than you will for the materials to build a house, right? Do you think it costs a lot more to make a bigger bedroom than a smaller bedroom?
No, cost is more.
Well, think about it.
The
So
small one.
this, okay, let's say I have a room, okay? I'm gonna put a room, make a neat little room here with 4 walls with like a hallway around it. We'll call it a panic room. Okay, we'll call it a panic room. There's 4 walls there, right? Is it gonna take me that much longer to make it like that? To make it slightly larger?
Yes.
Will it? If I'm building a wall, I'm putting up pieces of wood, right? Then I'm putting drywall on it, and then taping the drywall. The time is about, it's close to the same, right? So in a larger house, they don't necessarily have more rooms. It's just the rooms are bigger, right? Also, the more space you have, the easier it is to work, right? It's very hard to work in a small space. Anybody done any carpentry or anything before, or renovation stuff? The less space you have, the harder it is to work. So I've been into some of these brand new houses in Winnipeg, and they're basically the same as smaller houses. They're just blown up, right? The kitchen has the same thing. It's got a sink, it's got a fridge, but there's a whole bunch of dead space. But the larger the house, the more they can charge you for it. So the developers that make houses, they can make more money by selling bigger houses and charging more for it, because their labor is almost the same as if they built a smaller house, but they can't charge as much for a smaller house. You see there's how that works? So to build a small house, your labor cost is not much different than building a much larger house. So they'd rather just make larger houses. It's the same argument for car manufacturers. There was an article about North American car manufacturers don't like making cars, and they hate making electric cars. They like making SUVs. And the reason they like making SUVs and trucks is that they can charge so much money for them. They make more money off of them. And it's that same thing. The labor cost is not a whole lot different on making a big SUV that they can charge $50,000 for than a car that they can only charge $20,000 for. So they'd rather just make SUVs. Interesting? Okay. And it has to do with like business and stuff. But those things can change. Eventually you're going to start seeing, I think you'll eventually start seeing cities changing codes to allow for small houses. Maybe it'd be kind of cool. I'd like to see in Winnipeg a brand new area pop up where no house can be built like larger than, like every house has to be below a certain standard. Right now it's like, here's your minimum and then everything's bigger, right? But I'd like to see it be smaller. That'd be neat. Yeah. Because there's good things that happen when you have a more population density, more people. You can have a store within walking distance, right? In a huge area where you have 2 or 3 people living in a 3,000 square foot house with a bunch of land around them, you don't have enough people in that area to have a grocery store there, right? They all have to get in their SUVs and drive to a grocery store. But if a lot of people live there, then you have grocery stores right there. Like my sister lives in downtown Toronto, and she never needs a car to go grocery shopping. You just walk. Because within a block, in any direction, there's a full service grocery store. Because so many people live there. Make sense? Yeah. So I call that urban planning. So that's a really cool career option if you're interested in that kind of stuff. You can become a career planner or urban developer for a city, and you actually plan out how the codes are going to change, where people are going to live, and you can actually change the rules, which is kind of neat. Yeah. Okay. I think, was it last year, Osborne Village? Everybody know Osborne Village? It was named the best community in Canada, and had a whole bunch of like rules about access to services, also like demographics. Like, so Osborne Village was named like the number one neighborhood in Canada because it had a perfect mix of wealthy people and people who weren't wealthy, all living close together. Anybody who lives there doesn't need a car because you have full service grocery stores there, and you have access to really good nightlife. You got restaurants, you got everything is within walking distance. So that's good for urban planning, right? You don't have people using cars and buses as much. And affordable housing. So there's cheap rent there in Osborne Village, and there's also expensive stuff. So from an urban planning standpoint, Osborne Village, they said, is like the best neighborhood in Canada to show the way that cities should be. Yeah. Anybody live in Osborne Village? No.
I don't know.
Just over the bridge, right?
Oh, okay then.
Yeah, there's a big Safeway there and stuff. But if you look at it, there's a lot of high rises there. It's not a lot of separate houses, right? Once you have a bunch of separate houses, that's when you have what are called bedroom communities. They call them that because people just kind of sleep there, and then they got to leave, right? There's a line of cars. If you go, has anybody been to the southwest part of the city? Waverly West, Bridgewater Forest? Yeah, everybody there has to drive. Every day they got to get in a car, and they got to drive for a long time, sit in a row of cars. Or at the very least, they have to get to the IKEA area to be able to get this stuff, right? Anybody know what that's called when you have all the new housing built outside the city center? What's that? Yeah, there's an expression for it. It's called urban sprawl, which is like spreading out, right? And then it causes a problem with cars because everybody has to, the further you go, the more you need a car to get back in, right? And Winnipeg's not that bad, but some cities, it's normal for people to drive an hour to get to work. Right? Some places it's worse. But Winnipeg, it's very, like most people don't drive an hour to get to work. 25 minutes, half an hour is kind of that. What's that?
Other cities is not that big.
Yeah, because it's not that big. Yeah, but it is fairly spread out, and it becomes a problem if it keeps spreading, right? Now, luckily, because we have the floodway, most people don't want to live outside the floodway. What's the problem with living outside the floodway?
Speaking of that, there's a fire going on there.
A what?
A fire
Where?
at Red River. It's on it's on CBC.
Hmm. So certain parts, like especially the south side, people don't want to live beyond the floodway because then they flood. Right? Flood's really bad. Right? There was a time when people were like getting in a boat, going out their front door in 1997. If you were here in 97, outside of Winnipeg, it looked like we were in an ocean. Yeah. So floods destroys everything. Water pulls buildings down, right? Water is very strong. So I think Winnipeg can only develop like to the floodway, and then it'll have to start coming back, and then it'll have to go up. But it'll be a long time before that happens. I think people are scared of winter. And they probably should be. But global warming, we might become like a tourist destination for nice weather. Right? People fly to Winnipeg, get the nice mild weather. Okay, so that's area, and all you do is just multiply whatever two dimensions you have. Now, careful. A triangle, just to visualize this, a triangle is half a rectangle. So I'm just going to show you here. If this is a rectangle, and this is your length, and this is your width, if I multiply those two things together, I'll get this whole area. But what if I did this? Now what have I got?
A sandwich.
Yeah. I've got two triangles. If I want to know the area of the triangle, I just do the same thing. These two things multiplied, but then I need to cut it in half. So just remember that a triangle is half a rectangle. So triangle is a half rectangle, which means you multiply your two dimensions and then just divide by 2.
Yep.
So you don't need to remember a formula. The formal formula for a triangle is 1/2 base times height, but it's just the two things, the two sides, then cut it in half. And then the only other special one is the circle, and the only dimension you have is the radius, and it gets multiplied twice. We call that radius squared. So on a calculator, you'd have to use that YX key, or you might have an actual squared key on yours. If you have an X squared key, you can use that.
So is it YXP?
So for example, if I wanted to find the area of a circle that had a radius of 10, I would go pi times 10 and then times 10 again. Or I could go pi times 10 exponent to 10 squared. It means the same thing. You'll get the hang of it when you get to circles. Okay. Okay, so you can start those questions. We'll work through these other examples tomorrow, but you can certainly start the more basic ones on page 7. Okay. And tomorrow we'll do a couple more examples and we'll finish this up for area.
Is the YX?
The exponent key, yep.
So YX times 10 times 10.
No, if you're doing 10 times 10, you don't need to use the YX key. I'm just saying you could go 10 YX 2